Now we were talking about the meristems. There is apical meristem which is present at the top of the tip of the plant where you see the plant actually growing. You always see a narrower part, a tip, an iceberg kind of shape which is always actively dividing. This is known as the apical meristem. Have you ever noticed if any plant loses this tip, if by chance this tip is broken accidentally or intentionally, the plant stops growing in height. In most of the time, the plant fails to grow at this point, and these apical meristems are not just here, they are present even in the lateral branches tips. Sometimes in certain plants, for example, if this is not leaf and a branch of the plant, if this tip is broken, this branch will fail to branch further or would not grow. So these apical meristems are very important for the development and for the length of the plant. Now coming over to intercalary meristem. By now you know what is an internode. This is the distance between the two leaves. That it can be smaller, it can be larger. Sometimes it can be that small that you do not notice the two separate branches. Sometimes it is elongated, that's why you can see easily, as in the case of this diagram. All of you would have seen the grass. How many of you have noticed that those small bush like appearances are interconnected to each other in the ground? So those are the lateral branches what you see. If you would have ever seen or noticed, when the grass is planted in the ground, it's only a small bunch which is put in. Now it spreads and covers the whole ground and make it green in the park. This is because of the presence of intercalary meristem. Now coming to the lateral meristem, you see the darker region here. This lateral meristem is active below the apical meristem, just below the apical meristem. It is not needed in the region where apical meristems are active. So that's why it helps in increasing the girth. Girth means the thickness of the tender stem of the plant and making it more stronger by having more number of cells throughout the plant body. Now coming over to meristematic tissues and their detail. It is of three types. By now you remember apical meristem, lateral meristem and intercalary meristem. Now going over to apical meristem. It is present at the growing tip of stem and roots. It is also termed as shoot apex. Apex means the tip, and the root apex. Shoot apex go towards light and root apex goes towards earth. Function. It results in increase in the height of the plant in the air, as you all see. Now what is lateral meristem? These are found beneath the bark. Now what is bark? It is also known as cork cambium. Bark is the outermost layer. It is just like the skin we have on our body, and that outer layer, when it is thickened and is brown, is known as bark, and when it is green, then it is termed as epidermis. Function is to help in increasing the diameter, that is the thickness of the stem or the plant. These are found beneath the bark, just below the epidermis. When you look at closely the diagram given in your book, you will see that there is epidermis, and just below to it the layer is responsible for the continuous division, and it is having the little meristematic cells. What is intercalary meristem? It is located at the base of leaves or internodes. Example, stems of grasses, that is at the base of the lateral branches. From here These meristematic tissues help in the lengthening of the branch. It increases the number of branches too, because this branch doesn't grow like this, it grows like this. Okay, so that's why this meristematic tissues have an active role in branching of the branches and also the lengthening and growth of the branches. Moving over to permanent tissues. These tissues are derived from meristematic tissues, but these cells have lost the power of division. Now, when the apical meristem is moving along with the tip of the plant, at that time the cells which are left behind, some of them will lose the meristematic function and will become permanent tissues. Now, these permanent tissues, what is the feature of these permanent tissues? These permanent tissues are not actively dividing, have lost the function of division but have become elongated, and the cells grow to their original size, the maximum size, and starts functioning as usual plant cells. They either differentiate into different functions like leaves, roots, plant body, fruits, flowers, or are responsible for storage. There are two types of permanent tissues: simple permanent tissues and complex permanent tissues. Today we will be discussing only about the simple permanent tissues in this video. Let us go to the other presentation. Going to the simple permanent tissues. Now these permanent tissues are of three types: parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. When you look closely at their structure, parenchyma cells are round and are having lot of intercellular spaces. Collenchyma is having certain type of thickening around the cell membrane, and sclerenchyma has lot of thickening. This the cell space inside the cell is very less in case of sclerenchyma, intermediate in collenchyma, and lot of it in parenchyma. When we look closely, some of the parenchyma cells are also responsible for photosynthesis, and therefore they bear certain green colors because of the presence of chloroplast in it, whereas sclerenchyma tissues have different functions. This is the close-up of these simple permanent tissues. Why do we call them simple? Because they are not associated with any other type of cells, but the similar cells are put together to form the whole tissues. This is the diagram for collenchyma, and this is the diagram for parenchyma. Let us now parenchyma. Parenchyma has certain characteristics. You just have to concentrate here. Parenchyma cells are living and possess the power of division. Sometimes, as you can look at this diagram, they are having a lot of intercellular spaces and are actively involved sometimes in photosynthesis. That's why they bear green color. They can be colorless as well. Sometimes they won't be responsible for photosynthesis. Now, the cell wall is thin and enclosed as a dense cytoplasm which contains a small nucleus. Intercellular spaces are present. Although they are dividing, but they are not very fast and actively dividing cells. Parenchyma serves as a food storage tissue, and is responsible for the transportation of the material. Now, comprehending the functions of parenchyma, it allows gaseous exchanges because of the presence of spaces, stores waste product of the plant. If chloroplast is present, the parenchyma tissue is called as chlorenchyma, and it helps in performing photosynthesis. If we consider the case of aquatic plants, in aquatic plants, this chlorenchyma becomes parenchyma. Why? Because it is having large air bubbles, and because of this air bubbles, the tissues become buoyant, that is, they float and they provide the buoyancy to the plants. These air cavities are present in the tissue of parenchyma to give them buoyancy, and that is known as parenchyma. Now let us look at it closely. Here there are certain bubbles, if you can see clearly. These bubbles are present in the stems or any part of the aquatic plant, which makes them float on the water. This property is reserved for aquatic plants. I think all of you would have seen lotus, and if you look at the lotus stems, they are spongy. When you actually break them and see from the inside, they are having a lot of spaces. Those spaces are because of the presence of this parenchyma, and this is the reason lotus floats on top of the water and doesn't sink inside. Now going over to chlorenchyma characteristics. They are living, just like the previous ones, but they are characterized by the deposition of extracellulose at the corners or the boundaries, you can say, of the cell. Intercellular spaces are generally absent. They are placed close to each other, right? And they are having a nucleus. This black dot depicts the nucleus. You can see that there are certain thickenings at the near the cell membrane. That's why they have less interlumen space. This space inside is known as interlumen space, and this is the vacuole. You can see the vacuole has been decreased, the cytoplasm has been less, and all the organelles are fixed inside or floating inside the cells. What you cannot see here in the diagram, but is actually present, and the most prominent is the nucleus. Now, what are the functions of this chlorenchyma? It is mechanical tissue and provides mechanical support and elasticity. It allows bending of plants parts without actually breaking them. Have you ever tried breaking a plant twig? If it is green in color, it will be having slight of flexibility, elasticity. It will not break immediately. But if it is dried up and brown in color, if you try to break it, it will break with a noise and will be brittle. Now coming over to sclerenchyma. They are dead cells. The walls are generally thickened with deposition of lignin, and there is no intercellular space. This intercellular space is missing, and the cell walls are very much thickened. You can see the dark lines here. These are the presence of sclerenchyma, and sclerenchyma is usually not living, but there are more components to it. The two components of sclerenchyma are a sclerid and a fiber. Fiber is of different shape. It is elongated spindle shape, and it is having a lumen. Lumen means a space. The cell wall is thick, very thick, because of deposition of the materials. Now coming over to